Hey, podcast listeners. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we are going to talk about the weight of words. Language is what makes us most human. Words represent ideas and concepts that influence us and allow us to change the world around us. Words make us powerful, and words ground us to reality. Words are how we express what's inside us, so our emotions no longer haunt us, and we're no longer alone in our feelings because what's shareable is bearable. Words make us free. Words are meant to be weighty, as they are filled with meaning. When we understand someone's words, we understand them in a way that allows us to see their soul. Words create the potential for true intimacy, being known and knowing another person. Words give life, and we live through words. Most of all, words can embody truth, which begets life and healing. Now that I'm a therapist, I'm realizing the weightiness of words like never before. Yet most people are in the dark, which is reflected by how few people actually listen. Even many therapists are poor listeners and don't understand the importance of words. This is true because most of us are not familiar with conversations of gravitas and meaning, but rather empty chatter where people talk at us, not with us. So many people fill up the air with meaningless words. These are people who are desperate to connect but have no idea how. No one has ever truly listened to them or gotten to know them, and they don't know how to be authentic or have insight. They've never felt seen, and the choice and volume of their words reflects this. They expect others to listen to them prattle on so they can feel nurtured, but have no idea that their speech is creating the opposite effect, which is pushing people away. The Seinfeld show had a name for people like this, and they called them nothing talkers. In high school English class, I learned a quote I have never since forgotten. The quote is, "Great minds talk about ideas. Mediocre minds talk about events. And small minds talk about people." It is true. Isn't it interesting to pay attention to what things people do not talk about? For example, I am reflecting now on an old friend that I had to break ties with recently. And I'm recalling how when we used to be friends, we'd talk all the time about light and happy subjects like traveling, like books, like movies, food, nature. But I realized that she never talked about her feelings, especially the feelings that we would name as difficult feelings. Nor was she at all interested to hear mine. Not once in the 30 plus years of her marriage did she ever talk about her marriage. Even when myself and our other friends would share about our marriages and our struggles, she would always be silent. When we would all talk about the difficulties and struggles of parenting, this friend would stay silent. I learned since that there was a very good reason for her silence and never sharing her feelings, because she was and still is in major denial. That's just how bad things are. What people do not talk about is very revealing if you can pay attention. Words are metaphorical because they represent concepts and images. If you pay attention to the words that people use, they depict a picture. Every word matters, and the devil is really in the details. The point of speaking is to feel heard not just by another, but by ourselves. Because we humans think out loud. We need others to listen in order for us to develop self-awareness and insight of our own thoughts and feelings. A good listener creates a safe environment for this to happen, where it feels like what we say matters and we are not rushed, but can take our time to unpack what's inside of our head and body. This is something we cannot do for ourselves. A good listener takes time and thinks about every word that is said and ponders it, allowing us to do the same. They reflect back what they hear, which gives us more insight and understanding. The goal of listening is understanding for both parties. The sum of two people having a genuine conversation is infinitely greater than the sum of its parts. It is truly a creative act of beauty as both individuals contribute to something new, a new way of understanding the world, themselves, and one another. I used to think that listening was mostly a drag, something you tolerate until it's your turn to talk, and then the fun starts. But I was wrong. Now that I'm a therapist spending many hours of my day listening, I find I do not get tired of it. And it's paradoxical because you'd think that the more you listen, the less space you have to hold more. But it's actually the opposite. As I listen, I am riveted with the story being revealed. The more I hear, the more questions I have because I want to further understand. I no longer have to bite my tongue waiting until it's my turn to speak because listening is actually where it's at. There's so much to learn, and my clients learn with me as they make new associations by putting their thoughts and feelings into a coherent narrative. Deep listening is 90% of the therapeutic modality. I've learned to pay attention to repeated words or phrases. If a client repeats something, I know it is significant. If I hear something a second time, I will ask her to say more. For example, if she's repeated that this year is different than last, I'll say, I hear that. Help me understand what makes it different and how that is for you. If they use a word that is metaphorical, I pay special attention. For example, if they say that they're in a rocky relationship, I will hone in on this metaphor and say, tell me what makes it most rocky. I will stay with the metaphor. So if they say their partner's anger is the factor that makes it most rocky, I will ask them if they've ever experienced a smoother road and what that was like for them. Metaphors are bridges to communicate concepts that we wouldn't otherwise have words or language for. So I chase after them. My goal is to tread slowly, mining every word and every phrase for meaning, because beneath the surface, there is gold. I remember wishing that this is what my therapist would do for me before I became a therapist. It was actually just the opposite, where I would share something that I thought had meaning and significance, but the therapist would skip right over it or dismiss it altogether. I once shared how a strange man had yelled at me just prior to the session, and I wanted to process how much it impacted me and why. The therapist seemed to view my experience as just an obstacle to the real work of therapy, waving her hand in the air and telling me, that's just a him problem. You're fine. With another therapist, I confessed a wicked comment that I had made that morning to my daughter that was haunting me and eating me up inside. When I shared it, he minimized it, saying, "Kids are resilient. She'll get over it." He showed no curiosity for why I said what I did or empathy. He refused to help me understand why I had said this horrible thing, which would have helped me better understand the dynamic with my daughter at that time. Now, these are just two examples of something I experienced many times over in therapy with many different therapists. Needless to say, I wasted a lot of time and money on therapy. But the good news is it taught me the importance of being a good listener when I would someday become a therapist. Today, I have created a life for myself that no longer contains any nothing talkers. And this allows me to give my full attention to the words of those around me and weigh them carefully. Our listening ears are a precious commodity, and we must guard against them being used by people who want to be heard but have nothing to say. Attentive listening is lost on such people, and it will drain us and divert our attention away from those who would benefit from being heard. So let's listen with the goal of understanding. Let's help one another and ourselves make sense out of the world and ourselves within it. Let's use words wisely and give them back the gravitas and dignity that they are due. Words are what makes us holy and beautifully human. Thanks for listening today. Please share this with a friend. Please subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, and please give me a stellar review.